What's up, ladies and gentlemen of the internet? It's your boy, the number one roaming reporter in MMA, Jack Slack, coming at you live from outside American Kickboxing Academy, where everyone has been kicked out of the gym, and it's episode 73 of the Fights Gone By podcast. You find me in an especially good mood because the event coming up this weekend is one of the best cards I've seen in a very long time. I actually had 4 articles open on my computer, and it looks like I'm only going to finish about 2 of them. There's so much going on, and I don't have time to cover it all. But I will talk about it all today, so you'll get sort of the treatment, but not entirely. So yeah, that's what's going on there. And then we got some interesting news, and we got some questions to catch up on because I haven't done one of these in a little while. So let's kick it off with the aforementioned news. Kamaru Usman versus Santiago Ponzinibbio was booked for the UFC Chile event. That's the first event in Chile, and that's going to be the main event. It was rumoured to be Ponzinibbio versus Magny for a little while, which would have been interesting, but really doesn't feel like a main event. Usman doesn't feel like a main event quality star either, but, you know, at least they got Ponzinibbio, and he's from vaguely the same area in that he's from South America. Co-main event is Shogun versus Vulcan Özdemir. So Özdemir's been put in a position where you've had your title shot, you got rushed into that pretty quick. Now go fight Shogun. He's 100 years old and we don't want him fighting for the title. I have to say, if I lived in Chile, maybe I'd buy tickets to that event, but otherwise, definitely don't bother. In fact, if I lived outside of the city it's taking place in, I don't think I'd bother. Paddy Plimbitt extended his deal with Cage Warriors. To the ire of the MMA community, everyone in the MMA community was like, oh, he's just scared of fighting real competition, blah, 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 while simultaneously shitting on Conor McGregor for not defending his 2 Cage Warriors titles, which nobody really defends regional titles. Well, I say regional. You know, no one defends smaller organisation titles. Conor McGregor didn't beat any previous champion to win either of those titles. They were just slapped on the matches he was in. But, you know, can't point that out. But I don't think Plimbitt's champion at the moment, is he? He was for a little while, I think. Can't remember. But he wears wicked Sakuraba shorts. He's got a lot of work to do on his striking, but he's a fun fighter to watch. And he's always the laugh in the cage afterwards. And his hair is awful. He looks like Jay from The In-Betweeners. Other news. Josh Barnett receives no suspension. Just a public reprimand. But he has been out for almost a year and a half, which in itself is basically a suspension. Doubt he's getting compensation for that in any real degree, though. However, he has been doing commentary for New Japan and things like that, so he's set career-wise, but it's pretty cool that he's coming back. This is one of my blind spots because I'm fine with Josh doing whatever he wants as long as I get to see Josh Barnett fight some more. However, he does have a very bad history with performance-enhancing drugs, or failing drug tests, rather, but in this instance, they did actually say that it's a tainted supplement. People now saying that's opening the door for the John Jones thing, but the John Jones thing, they didn't even try and bring a supplement that they thought was tainted. It was a very weak defense. And then other news, Paul Craig signed a 4-fight deal with the UFC. He had held out and had been knocked out badly the previous 2 times. And it was sort of looking like his career in the UFC was a bust. But that literally the last second of his UFC contract, he saved it with that triangle. So I hope he got some good money. I would guess, I mean, the thing coming out today was that Gokhan Saki is on a card, or has been announced to be fighting on a card, but they haven't got an opponent for him. I would say they'll probably give him Paul Craig, because Craig's takedowns aren't great, and his hands don't exist. So that would be the one I'd give Saki. Also, Paul Craig's chin is very suspect. And then the only other interesting piece of news is that I tweeted a basically word-for-word retelling of that Mayweather-Zab Judah story that came out before the fight, before the Mayweather-McGregor fight, that Zab had knocked out Floyd in sparring and Floyd had kicked everyone out of the gym. I changed it to Zab and Habib. Firstly, Zab Judah is 40 years old. I don't even think he's boxing professionally anymore. He's working as a nurse because he's now like a born-again Christian. Which, fair play to him, because he was always a bit of a dick during his career. But nobody at any point asked why 140-pound, when soaking wet, Zab Judah was sparring hard with Habib Nurmagomedov, but 4 different news sites ran it as a story, without anyone checking. And when I say anyone checking, I wasn't deceiving people. Like, my very next tweet was like, here's the tweet I'm referencing. But that is how low the bar is in MMA journalism. I got a lot of people being like, oh, I trusted you. And Like, if you follow me at all, I'm constantly on about people running stories without ever checking, or believing stories without ever checking. I mean, if you highlighted the phrase and Googled it, you'd find that it was literally just a pastiche on the original Mayweather-McGregor story, or Mayweather-Zab Judah story, or if you waited until the next tweet, which was like seconds later, or if you checked my pinned tweet, which actually explained it. But there are still people on my Twitter feed coming up being like, oh my god, I hope this doesn't mean the fight's off, which is absolutely hilarious. And then other people being like, I'm never believing a word you say again. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, is it my job to protect you from satire? Very strange business, but I'll try and name and shame them. MMA Imports, Kimura.se, nfight.ru, and there were a couple of others, but they all published it as a story, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And they called me a reporter, which is a little bit more offensive to me, to be honest. So that's today's thumbnail explained, if it hasn't already got pulled off YouTube. A couple of my favourite things that came out during this, I was watching these stories go up, and I was on their pages commenting, no, I made this up, please take this story down. But a couple of my favourite comments, people being like, yeah, well, you get knocked out in sparring, that's what happens. Oh, great comment here. If you don't get dangerous sparring partners that can hurt you, all these use just the letter U, by the way, and you never get hurt, then you probably won't never be a great fighter. That's been my experience in watching this sport. It probably means that the ready fight night, it's the good thing. So it's a good thing that Habib got knocked out by Zab. And I couldn't see whether they were, from their profile picture, whether they were black or white or what. They could have been like, this nigger Zab, or they could have been like, this nigger Zab. It's just amazing to think about someone getting really angry about that. Zab Judah he gave up his boxing career to become a professional saboteur. He now just goes into people's camp and knocks them out. There was another one, a rumour about him knocking out Pacquiao. I think that was before the third or if they had 4 Marquez fights, whichever one was the one that Pacquiao got knocked out in. But there were rumours that Zab Judah had knocked him out in sparring in that. Zab Judah is far more accomplished in the training stories than he is in the ring. But anyway, let's talk about UFC 223. Crackerjack card. You're in a good space when Zabit, we agreed to just call him Zabit. You're in a good place when Zabit is jerking the curtain for the entire card. That, if they put that, it's on Fight Pass, damn. Well, who's on the Fox one? Oh, they're opening with Evan Dunham versus Olivier Urban Mercier. That's decent, but I think if you opened the Fox card with Zabit, you'd get some more interest. I mean, that dude's phenomenal to watch. They're closing the Fight Pass card with Caceres versus Lobov. Oh, kill me. But everything else on this card is fucking great. Ray Borg is back on the undercard, where he belongs. Sorry, but if you're a flyweight and you're not the champion, you're on the undercard. But yeah, what should we do first? Should we talk about let's talk about the big fight. We'll talk about Tony versus Habib. I've held off till the last possible minute because I've written this article 3 times already. The fight has been cancelled 3 times. We are on the 4th booking of this fight. This fight is cursed. If it happens, I will just be so happy. In fact, I'll be happy as soon as the opening bell rings. If the fight's shit, I'll still be happy that it actually happened. But this is such an intriguing fight. I mean, I'm so glad that everyone now has realised that Conor McGregor is not the best lightweight in the world. He's a guy who came in and fought the guy who had just won the lightweight title and won, but didn't fight anyone else in the division. Whereas Tony Ferguson and Habib have mashed through multiple really good dudes. They've been fighting murderous rows. Habib less so. I mean, Tony Ferguson, the rate of activity and the competition he's been fighting, absolutely incredible. Obviously, both have had moments of weakness and chinks in the armour. But then, you'd see that more from McGregor if he fought more. The level of competition that you're fighting at in the UFC lightweight division, you are not going to get to the top unscathed. Now, the thing about this is that it's supposedly Sambo versus Jiu-Jitsu, or Sambo versus 10th Planet, and this, that, and the other. But Sambo's a weird one because everyone has a different idea of what it is anyway. You say Sambo, I think Russian Judo. But for some people, Sambo is leg locks. And the leg lock game in no-gi grappling and BJJ and everything else has advanced well beyond what was typically taught in Sambo. Sambo was famous for leg locks because it allowed leg locks where judo didn't. But then if you watch Habib Nurmagomedov fight, he doesn't fight like a leg lock guy at all, you know? So it's really like there's so much scope within any martial art. Just saying someone's a Samboista doesn't really... Sambo comrade? I don't know what they call themselves, but doesn't make any like indication of what they do. Does he have any leg lock submissions? I don't think he does. 0 leg lock submissions. There you go. So where we all go Sambo, he must be a leg lock guy. No. What he is really is a wrestler and a smashing guard passer. His guard passing is awesome, and his guard passing is completely MMA built. You know, it's not competition jiu-jitsu guard passing. It's taking advantage of guys trying to build up along the fence and smashing them down, keeping their hand behind their back, hitting them in the face. It's very much what I feel when I'm watching Habib Nurmagomedov is the same thing that I felt when I watched Fedor Emelianenko and a few others, or George St. Pierre and things like that, where this specific thing can only be done when we have this mix of styles and mix of rules. You know, if you did this under any single discipline, it wouldn't work as well. This is pure fighting at a very high level, and something that only works in pure fighting. Well, I mean, I'm sure if you trap someone's hand behind their back in jiu-jitsu competition, that's great, but the opportunities aren't there nearly as often. Obviously, Tony Ferguson considered the much better striker on the feet. However, Tony Ferguson relies a lot on his length. You know, he's a tall and gangly guy, and he throws these weird-ass punches, and a lot of what he does is like landing a punch as he rolls with his opponent's punch, and things that just are very, very dangerous. You know, he's not a striker in the classical mold by any means. He does do a number of things which are very peculiar and also change fights for him. I mean, if you watch his front kicks, they're brutal. It's like a front step kick, but it's like a piston going in. And that wins dudes so quickly. He did it to Josh Thompson, and Josh Thompson was breathing hard by the end of the first round. Did it to Edson Barbosa. That and Edson Barbosa's absolute fear of forward movement from his opponent just did him in. Actually, we should talk about Edson Barbosa because is he their only common opponent? I believe he might be their only common opponent. But basically, Edson Barbosa got done the same way by both of them, but in different ways. You know, the Edson Barbosa problem is that he is almost allergic to pressure, and it doesn't have to be thoughtful, methodical pressure. You know, you don't have to be Julio Cesar Chavez to get in there and make him work. He will run a mile if you run at him, and he exhausts himself running onto the fence and then having to circle out in a very small space. His footwork is just horrible, and it's not even his footwork because he can do it. Like the brief moments of success that he had in the Habib fight were when he stopped kicking and punched and moved. But he has absolutely abysmal ring awareness. He doesn't know where he is in the cage at any time. It's the same as Martin Kampmann. He'd just run backwards until he hit the fence and then go, shit, I better circle out. And if you're at the fence, you're circling out too late. You're giving them a good chance to get you. If you watch someone like Holly Holm, every time she takes a step back, she takes a step off to the side immediately after. Never 2 steps back on a line. Doesn't help that Edson Barbosa, when you get in his face, he tries to counter you by round kicking you, which is something that you can just step up the middle of. I mean, he's hurt dudes coming forward with round kicks, but you are just as likely for that to go horribly wrong and for you to end up getting punched on one leg and then stumbling backwards. Again, giving up more space. There were points in the Habib fight where Habib was just jogging after him, and I mean, people were like, well, that's because he was making a point and showing off and blah, blah, blah. Nothing about Habib's style, I mean, except the trash talking on the floor, nothing about him generally makes me think that he would waste time. Every second he's in the cage, he's working. He's not in the business of, like, showing off. He's in the business of beating people violently and trying to make them quit. His cage cutting previously has never been that impressive, and that is what's going to be interesting in this fight. Tony Ferguson, you know, he does use his feet a lot. He does a lot of shifting and stepping and stepping off at angles and weird stuff like that, but it all seems to be done in the spirit of trying to hit the guy in the face. I think for Habib, you have to have, again, the same with the Ronda Rousey thing. I was saying before the Rousey fight in Killing the Queen that what she does is run forward, so you just had to take a round of avoiding her. Let her use up her energy chasing you. And a lot of Habib's strategy seems to be chasing dudes. If you watch the fight with Michael Johnson, the way that he gets him to the fence, he shoots wildly from out in the open, gets sprawled on, and then just drives up to his feet and pushes him into the fence. A lot of what he does is brute forcing and running people down, and guys get overwhelmed. I mean, obviously he's a very technical grappler, but he does take shortcuts with his strength and speed that a better tactical and technical fighter wouldn't. But again, I don't know how much I've seen Tony Ferguson avoid a fight. He seems to be more in the spirit of being in the opponent's face. I don't think I've seen him execute a slick counter-striking plan. I mean, he was a little bit more measured against Rafael dos Anjos, but he was never avoiding him or sidestepping or anything like that. He was just a little bit slower getting into it. And he fingered him in the eye a few times, which helped. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to how much Ferguson can stay off the fence, both literally flattened against the fence and away from the fence. When I say off the fence, sometimes I mean literally not pressed to the fence, but a lot of the time I'm talking about keeping his back foot away from the fence. How well Tony Ferguson can use the space, and also a lot of it comes down to the positions they end up in if it does hit the ground. A lot of what Habib does is very dynamic. He doesn't stall out in closed guard or anything like that. He's the kind of guy who will stand, and it doesn't really matter if he gets knocked off balance or loses top position. He'll stand up to land some good punches just to make something happen. Like the punches he's raining down on Michael Johnson, just standing over him. I think Michael Johnson had him in knee shield, half guard or something like that, and he just stood up and started dropping punches on him. And Johnson got his legs back in between them and achieved full open guard, but he got smashed in the face a few times before he did so. And then a lot of what Habib does is capitalizing on guys standing up along the fence. Obviously something that doesn't exist in traditional jiu-jitsu and various other no-gi grappling that most people are familiar with. But is obviously a huge part of the MMA game. And when guys post a hand to try and get their hips away or stand up, I mean, guys are posting their hand on the floor more to get their hips away as well nowadays. It used to be you'd lay flat on your back and you'd try and shrimp. But when guys post the hand, he'll go around the back and just collapse it down. And then he's got the hand caught behind the back, which is just the worst position in MMA because the punches are coming from the same side that you would be blocking with that arm. But if you watch Jacare and Phil Davis, there's a few others. They do especially well catching the arm as guys post it to try and stand up. Both Phil Davis and Jacare have snapped up Kimuras from there. Habib is more in the business of just getting wrist control and smashing dudes. He hits beautiful weave passes or smash passes, whatever you want to call them. Dope mount is the other one. But where you cross the opponent's legs across themselves whilst flattening their body back, and you've got your knee in between theirs. BJ Penn made it very famous. It's basically the go-to of many top guard passers today. But he does it along the fence too, which is really nice. You'll watch him pick up and shelf a leg and then just walk around the dude and get into that smash pass. And the other one that he does is against Barbosa, he just stepped straight into mount along the fence. It was really weird watching it. Barbosa, a guy who knows what he's doing, and he just goes, nope, I'm mounting you now, and steps in and smashes his hips against Barbosa's chest as he sat against the fence, and then slides down him, crotch first, into mount. Very interesting. And the other one that I just can't get my head around is that Shin Iaquinta used to do this. When guys start shrimping out of your mount or getting a knee in, you just triangle your legs around their calves, and it's not a position you can really do anything from unless they make a really spastic mistake and give you the arm triangle. And Kawajiri started doing this immediately after he fought Iaquinta, and guys do it along the fence now too. It's we refer to it as laming it out. It's where you just hook the opponent's calves with your leg and sit on them because they can't get up, but you're not doing anything. Michael Bisping got caught there for half a second against GSP after being taken down and immediately went, come on, he's holding me down, he's stalling, let me up, because Michael Bisping, half of his appeal when I watch him fight is that he's always talking to the referee and talking about how he's been wronged. But that laming it out position, you've never seen anyone work effectively from it. But Habib uses it to land uppercuts, which are not a ground fighting strike, really. BJ Penn used to try and hit him from the mount, but you can't really. You're coming up from underneath the dude, and the very nature of being flat on the mat is that you are a straight line. The uppercut is used against an opponent who's slightly bent over or reaching. Doesn't work against dudes who are upright. Very well, at least. I mean, BJ Penn took GSP's nose off because he was in a bad position to uppercut, but he scuffed him with the uppercut anyway. But in that position, sitting on the guy's legs along the fence when he's sitting up, Habib was landing monstrous uppercuts from there, and I was really impressed by that. But again, I think this comes down to what sort of ground fight it is. If it's that sort of tangled, constantly moving, constantly scrambling ground fight that Habib likes, I think that's Habib's fight. But Tony Ferguson isn't the kind of guy who scrambles up. He's the kind of guy who goes for legs and works back to closed guard. I think it'd be interesting to see what happens if Habib gets into his closed guard, because a lot of what Habib does is just stand up and make stuff happen. I think you got put in closed guard by Michael Johnson, and he just stood up and started hitting him until he did something. But Tony Ferguson's closed guard has looked terrific. He's always posting on the hips, keeping the guy off him as soon as they start coming forward, but always keeping them from backing out as well, and always elbowing. And the elbows from the bottom, I think, could be a real interesting part of this fight, because if you can lock down Habib in closed guard, and work elbows effectively, you might have a modern day Rutan versus Randleman situation on your hands, where a guy could win a fight from the bottom by striking. But I think another important point to consider for Tony Ferguson is leg entanglements, because he does quite well on them generally, but also against Barbosa, he rolled upside down for that. He ended up in upside down closed guard. But things like that where you're on the guy's legs, when kicks aren't legal, he's having to work a lot to try and post up, keep himself off his back, and try and punch you in the head with the free arm, which just doesn't work a lot of the time. So that's the sort of position that could really help Ferguson. And he's constantly working with the 10th Planet lads, and they have been obsessed with leg locks since the Danaher Death Squad started winning all the EBIs. And of course, the great thing about leg entanglements is that, even if you don't finish the heel hook, you've got a decent chance of coming up on top or getting away. Craig Jones against Leandro Lowe is a terrific example. Or against Murillo Santana. He beat two world-class BJJ players by threatening them with heel hooks, and when they rolled out, he just kept hold of the foot and stood up with them, came up on top. I think, whoever wins this fight, they're going to end up putting together that Conor McGregor match, but I really hope to see some better ring cutting out of Habib, taking up a bit more space, watching his P's and Q's a little bit better. Because charging forward and jumping in with leaping uppercuts, not the one, really. And everyone talks about the Michael Johnson ones, and the Michael Johnson punches have become like this frame by frame, let's look through it and work out whether they connected or not. And people are being like, if they didn't connect, it doesn't matter. And it does. It's like the Arlovsky-Fedor fight. Arlovsky didn't really hit Fedor clean very much, but you could see how much Fedor was slowing down and that he was really having problems. You don't want to be in a position where we're going, did it land? It didn't. It just skimmed him there. The fact that there are those openings and you're getting caught out is the problem. So the Michael Johnson fight did show that he has problems with the left hand and counterpunches and generally working at range. Meanwhile, Ferguson is fairly reckless on the feet himself, and I don't think that Habib is the kind of opponent who dissuades you from being reckless. I mean, Ferguson's game on the feet, like intercepting people with elbows and things like that, that stuff is probably going to pay dividends against Habib, because Habib, firstly, he's got frosty snowflake white skin like any Russian, so he's going to cut badly if you catch him with an elbow. But secondly, he has a style which really plays into that. He leads with his face a lot. He leaps in with uppercuts. He dives after these takedowns. I think if Tony Ferguson is constantly trying to make, not just trying to land elbow strikes, but just letting Habib walk onto his elbows, I think he'll have a lot of success, and you'll probably see a bloodied up Habib by the end of the fight. And the real shame here is that if Tony Ferguson beats Habib, he'll do it through his brilliant all-round game, and then he'll fight Conor McGregor, and Conor McGregor will never have to deal with Habib. So, real shame there, but equally, if Habib wins, Tony Ferguson has been the legit world champion for some time, and Conor McGregor's been masquerading and never has to fight him. Someone's getting screwed in this, basically. I can't wait. I mean, I've done it to death. I've got 3 articles out there on it, I think. So go check them out. I might get another one in before the end of the week. But it's tremendous. It's high-level MMA, but both men have flaws, and I'm so excited to see who's get exploited. Then the co-main event is the highly anticipated rematch between Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Rose Namajunas. And this is a really interesting one because everyone seems to be either in the Joanna didn't take it seriously camp, or the Rose just has her number camp. And I'm honest, if I'm honest with you, I think Rose did everything right in the first fight, but I also don't know if that's the case. I have no idea whether it was just a one-off or if Joanna can come back and adapt. I don't think Joanna didn't take the fight seriously or anything like that. I'm not going to excuse her performance, because the things that Rose did were the sort of things that I would suggest someone do dealing with Joanna's habits anyway. Joanna is she does her best work against people who get in her face because she does well with the jab and counter-striking combinations and things like that. Rose Namajunas offered like a completely different pace, standing out at range, showing lots of feints. She had Joanna throwing at air. I mean, the stat that I read after the fight was Joanna threw 50 strikes and landed 5, I think it was. So she was swinging at shadows, and the feints had a huge, were a huge part of that. And the feints also numbed her to when Rose stepped in for real, and Rose really made distance quickly when she wanted to. Yeah, Joanna was fighting the fight that she'd fought against the previous 4 aggressive wrestle bangers that she'd fought, and it just didn't work against someone who was out of range trying to out kickbox her. And the other thing is that Rose Namajunas' style is not really kickboxing. Like, the kickboxing and Muay Thai games reward combination work and clinch work. What Rose was doing was outfighting with kicks, basically. So I think coming into the rematch, Rose Namajunas definitely pick up where she left off. Don't let Joanna work in combinations. Don't run your face onto her jab, which is how she lands her jab, people trying to stay in her face. And don't drive the pace on her. Just make her... I think a lower pace fight definitely favours Namajunas, because even though she hasn't knocked out a lot of people, I mean, I was pointing this out in the pre-fight piece I did, she lands really good counters. Like, she'll take half a round and then someone will lunge at her and she'll land a flush overhand on their head. Perfect counter, and then do nothing for the rest of the round. She's very interesting like that, and I prefer her now to what she was in the beginning, which was just sort of running at people, and that cost her that fight against Carla Esparza, because she was advertised as like the next Ronda Rousey for a little while. Then she shaved all her hair off, and they didn't want to market her anymore. But I think for Joanna, I would say try and cut the cage on her. Try and put Rose close to the fence. Rose really can't deal with bodywork well. It struggles in the clinch too. I mean, both of those things were how Carolina smashed her. It was, she was landing good counters on Carolina when Carolina lunged at her out in the open. But when Carolina fell into the clinch afterwards and started kneeing her, you instantly saw the air go out of Rose Namajunas, and she just became really ineffective very, very quickly. And she is tall and skinny for that weight class, so, smashing the midsection, never going to be a bad idea. I think I would like to see Joanna use her wrestling to get it to the clinch, to get into the clinch and get into along the fence. Rose is a very dangerous grappler, but again, when she's mainly been doing that against people who are going to try and head and arm throw her, literally the plague of women's MMA. It doesn't work in men's MMA, but women do it all the time. And then 1 in every 2 women's matches, the throw gets reversed and the other person comes out on their back. But, I mean, Joanna just picking up a single or something like that if she's getting close to the fence and driving her onto the fence, and then starting to work with elbows and knees from an upright position. That sort of stuff would be really good to see. Low kicking is a Joanna staple, but if you saw her in the first match, Rose has this very long stance, so she struggles to check low kicks, but she'll bounce and fake a step in, and Joanna would swing at the leg and miss as Rose was already going out, and then Rose would jump back in to punch. That's something that you see Tiffany Van Soest do. She'll put the leg there, immediately retract it, and if they've started kicking, she'll step in again and punch, and if they haven't started kicking, she won't bother. That's what I'm suggesting for Quinta versus Felder too, actually. Just if you can draw a naked low kick by bouncing around and putting your foot in and taking it out, doing the hokey cokey, then that's a great time to burst in on someone. But I think the clinch is the key for Joanna in this fight, and the cage, because there was a really interesting moment in the first fight where Joanna stepped in or something like that, and Rose cracked her with the standard counter, and it was beautiful. And then Joanna continued into like a 4-strike combination. Didn't really do much. Ended with a low kick or a high kick or something like that. But it was a real contrast between the styles. Rose works in 1s and 2s. Joanna works best in like 4s and 5s because she's an Esto Hus student and really traditional kickboxing style. Plus a really nice jab. But the jab, not really a boxing jab, more a weapon when someone's constantly pressuring her. She's not really great at like getting the jab in out in the open. Another interesting look of Joanna's that I've been recommending everyone take up, and now you're seeing it a lot more. When she has someone along the fence, she goes with the right straight to the body because their stance is shortening, they're squaring up, and it's just the best time to put that in. And it's a real winding punch if you land it well, especially if you hit the solar plexus. You're going to fuck up their day. But that punch against Rose would be a treat. So I'm very excited to see what happens there. The problem is, like, Joanna Jędrzejczyk has the wrestling and the counter-wrestling and everything else to be the great champion and take on all these guys like Claudia Gadelha, Jessica Andrade, my roidy Brazilian princess, and actually both of those, but and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. But those 3 fighters are all horrendous matches for Nama Yunus. I think she has a horrible time against all 3 of them, but I also think that she has the skills to pay the bills against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I think if Jędrzejczyk wins, it'll be an adjustment, a real adjustment. I think people will write it off as like just a one-off that she lost in the aftermath, but I think she will have had to change something to get this done. Because what she was doing previously just didn't work at all against Rose. The other fights on the card that I'm really excited for are Iaquinta versus Paul Felder. I've written an article about that. It should be going up today. Paul Felder's strength is not as a striker. He's advertised as a striker, but his strength is as a hitter. His footwork is very plodding. He has a tendency to follow people, which got him in trouble against Cruikshank, where Cruikshank would do that dart, get out the side door, and throw the Wonder Boy sidekick from the opposite stance when Felder turned to follow. And Felder kept doing it, and he kept kicking him in the face while he was doing it. Felder also has this like habit of falling into tit-for-tat exchanges. So you throw some punches, okay, now it's my turn and I'll come back. So if you punch him a couple of times, wait for him to come back and keep swinging, he can get into trouble there. Where Felder's very good is in the clinch. He'll post his head underneath yours, and he works well from the overhook, but he smashes guys with elbows from that position, which is not that common. And knees, obviously, really good from that position for everyone, because you can get your hips back and keep them posted against the fence in a stance where they can't defend themselves. Iaquinta, they keep talking about his boxing, but really he's right-hand happy. I mean, his jab looked decent against Lozon, but Lozon's a kind of guy who doesn't really use his feet. He prefers to cover up, and that gets him into trouble when guys start using elbows like Jim Miller did, or just start firing in longer combinations as Iaquinta did. But I think... I definitely read the article, but I think Iaquinta has to draw the low kicks out and things like that, and then try and double jab in and land the right hand. He had real trouble against Masvidal because Masvidal could control the range and was always aware that the right hand was the real threat. I don't think he'll have as much trouble landing on Paul Felder because Paul Felder is very much in-your-face kind of guy. If he leads Felder around the cage, because he's got good footwork, Iaquinta. If he leads him around the cage and has him following, I think he's got a good few chances to crack him with the right hand. I'd really like to see him doing some Petrosian slash Willie Pep stuff. Jab 1-2 in, skip out the side, change stances, and throw the left hand. Not really his sort of game, but that's one way that you can do the same sort of out the side door and catch him as they follow that Cruikshank was doing, but without having to have a sick sidekick game. For Felder, I think you've got to chop up that lead leg. I think you've got to get him into clinches and pound the body. And, if you're drawing the right hand, I'd love to see him land some of those counter knees. He's very good on the counter, but he does sort of rely on guys getting into a predictable pattern. If you watch his fight with Ricci, he lands that counter elbow that sort of sets up the finish. But Ricci's not feinting at all, and if there's one thing that Ray Longo is very good at, it's stressing that you need to feint lots. But the other one that I really like, and I really wish that both these fights were being competed at like 150, and then you could have a round robin later in the night, is Renato Moicano versus Calvin Kattar, the Boston finisher, who's just finished his first fight in like 10. But Kattar just beat Burgos, which was an awesome knockout, and a really good fight, actually. Both guys looked really solid. And Renato Moicano, coming off that victory over Jeremy Stephens and that loss to now title contender Brian Ortega, but he tooled Brian Ortega up on the feet in that fight. I would say that Kattar is the better... Actually, I wouldn't, because I just remembered that it's Keita, which is stupid because it's got 2 T's. But I would say that Keita's the better boxer. His jab looks really nice. Against Fili, he was stepping off at a backward 45 and changing stances and drawing Fili onto counterpunches from a southpaw stance. Anyone who does that, instant boy. But the glide back uppercut he threw when Burgos was lunging for the clinch, that was beautiful too. And he set it up he hurt Burgos by double jabbing in, or feinting and then jabbing in, to crack him with the right hand as he leaned back. Very smart guy, clearly knows what he's doing. I think for Moicano, I would stick to the kicking game, because his straights are a little bit like Brazilian Muay Thai style, with the elbows flared and he's sort of swimming front crawl or paddling a canoe. His boxing form is not nearly as tight, but I think if he uses the kicks to set up the flurries, that'd work quite well. For Keita, I'd focus on the jab, and probably working in shorter combinations, not doing the 3s and 4s, but focusing on the 1s and 2s. Using the push kick, because Moicano likes to kick so much. But of course, you've got to be careful of the takedown. But then the takedown got Moicano guillotined in his last fight, so he might have a little bit of a complex about doing that in this fight. But that's a terrific fight. Can't wait for that to happen. I was writing an article on it, and it sort of just fell by the wayside because there's so much going on this weekend. But either man wins there. That's a really good name on their record. Running out of time, so we better run down the rest of this card. What else we got? Michael Chiesa versus Anthony Pettis. Why is Anthony Pettis still on main cards? I mean, hardcore fans are a little bit bored of him being pushed as top tier when he's sort of like middle of top tier. But that's fun, you've got a savvy grappler in Michael Chiesa versus a middling striker but surprisingly good on the ground, Anthony Pettis. And Michael Chiesa finishes most of his opponents from the back, and Anthony Pettis has a specialty of escaping back control. So, that was his whole fight with Charles Oliveira. He just escaped back control 20 times until Charles Oliveira got tired. So you got an interesting matchup specifically in one position there. Carolina's taking on Felice Herrig. Carolina, I think she's pretty overrated as a technical striker, or as a striker generally. But then so's Herrig. So I reckon that'll probably devolve into a tedious ground fight. Ray Borg versus Brandon Moreno. Meh. Joe Lozon. Good on him. Oh, his opponent's got a Wikipedia page since the last time I was here. Lost his last 2 by submission. Oh, promising. Yeah, maybe they're giving Joe Lozon a win. I'm glad that they've stepped down his level of competition, because going back to that Iaquinta fight and watching some of the fights since, Joe Lozon's been fighting some dudes who are top up-and-comers, and Joe Lozon really in the twilight of his career now. He's not going to be making a title run anytime soon, as much as I love him. Evan Dunham versus Olivia Orban Mercier, that's a good fight. Last time I saw Orban Mercier, his jab was looking, I don't want to say sharp, but floating and graceful, like Rory Max. But then he is a tri-star boy, so that's probably why. And Evan Dunham his striking really improved, surprisingly, actually. I thought he was always going to be sort of like an overwhelming wrestle person, but he surprised me a few years ago. I think it was after that fight with Nick. Was it Nick Lentz he fought? And it was a really ugly fight, but his striking looked considerably better, and he started really putting it together from there. Yeah, Nick Lentz. That was 2012. That's made me feel like time has just disappeared. He's coming off that majority draw with Dariush. God, that was a weird one. And then Alex Caceres versus Artem Lobov. That's one for the simpletons. That's one for the memeing crowd. Alex Caceres is a guy who seems capable of doing anything, but not when he's asked. And Artem Lobov, He's surprised against Cub Swanson. He's capable of better than he seems like he's capable of. He seems to rise to the occasion quite well. Beck Rawlins versus Ashley Evans-Smith, meh. Devin Clark versus Mike Rodriguez, meh. And then Zabit, way! I'm assuming that's a showcase. I haven't looked at his opponent. But, I mean, that's a really good card. If there's like 6 fights that make me want to talk at length about them, you've got a very good card there. A number of those fights I would consider paying a portion of $60 for, which is more than I can usually say. I mean, Ortega versus Edgar, which wasn't even the main event, was the only fight on that card that I would have paid for, were it not my job. Anyway, let's do some questions and then we'll get out of here for this week. Hey Jack, if you had your way, what rule changes would you make? I have been watching some Pride and Glory events and it had me thinking what we could take from them. First round, 10 minutes. An extra round if the fight is very close. Anything that you think would make the sport better. The only thing I wasn't a fan of was yellow cards for stalling. Also, I was listening to Faraz Zahabi and he mentioned how if one round ends with someone in mount/guard, etc., the next round should start there. From Dylan. First round 10 minutes is a good way to... Well, no, I don't know if it is. It used to be thought that it was a good way to get finishes. I'm always in favour of longer fights because you get guys tired and then they get finished easier without taking so much damage necessarily. But first round 10 minutes did turn some fights into slogs. I mean, for every amazing 10-minute first round, there were rounds that went 5 minutes and then just fell into like stalling and closed guard. Especially watching that Pride Middleweight Grand Prix from 2005 again, a lot of the very first event, Total Elimination 2005, the 10-minute rounds in that felt very long because dudes were just stalling, or rather stalling each other out. I have always said that Glory's rounds are too short. I think 3-minute rounds is not enough to have a real fight. I think if you went to 3 5-minute rounds, I mean, they've already adopted the weight classes from MMA. So if you adopted the times, you've got more chances of finishes and less close rounds. It's very hard to work out. It's a lot easier to work out in 5 minutes who's done more work than in 3 minutes. Extra round if it gets close, that's always dangerous because, the one I'm always thinking of is Sakuraba versus Mezga. Mezga put in a great performance against Sakuraba when Sakuraba was like top boy. And then they say, okay, extra round. And Ken Shamrock goes, no, we're not having an extra round, and tells the guy Mezga to go to the back. Very strange. But the other one I think of is Buakar versus Masato. Buakar beat Masato convincingly through 3 rounds or whatever it was. And then the judges made him do an extra round just because they wanted to try and give it to Masato. Because if you win the extra round, you only had to win 1 round to actually get the fight. I think I'm very cautious about anything that... I don't like promoters being able to change up things, or promoters or judges being able to change up the fight on the night. I think a fighter signs for a 15-minute or 25-minute fight, and they should have that. I don't think they should be signing for a 15-minute fight with the possibility of an extension and so on. Because you just add more chances for people to get screwed over by either bad judging or corrupt judging. Only thing you weren't a fan of was yellow cards for stalling. Do you know who was a fan of that? Vanderlei Silva. I think, rule-wise, I mean, my things are always more mechanical. I always think, I would prefer if we got some gloves that cupped the fucking hands. And if we could somehow... I mean, it can't be that hard to come up with an octagon that could be adjusted in size. You just put some rails underneath the matting and then pull back the matting and slide the thing in, slide the sides in. I mean, it'd be a bit more complicated because you'd have to have it either spiral or something like that. I don't know, because obviously it's not a square. But I think, the smaller octagon makes for much funner fights, and it also makes the lower weight classes more interesting because you have... Joe Rogan's always talking about having fights on basketball courts or football fields, but with guys like 125-pound guys in a 30-foot cage or whatever it is, the larger cage, it really does feel like a fight on a football field, and the cage only really becomes a factor very occasionally. Compared to, say you get 2 heavyweights in the cage and they're always running onto the fence. I don't know. I think my main thing would be bring back knees to the head on the ground. And up kicks. I think up kicks... The problem with up kicks is if you make up kicks legal, you are allowing one person to kick the other person in the head on the ground, but you aren't allowing the person on top to kick. And that gets even more complicated when you're talking about, like, if you're in a submission, like an omoplata or an armbar... Well, not an armbar, maybe an omoplata or something like that, or a leg entanglement, where you are down on the mat, but maybe you're in the top position. Are you allowed to kick the other guy in the head? It gets very complicated. Actually, in the Pride Grand Prix episode, which if you're a Patreon boy and you haven't listened to yet, you should, but in the most recent episode of the History podcast, we were talking about using the knee to the face from the knee shield, and a guy knocked himself out on a knee shield this week. He knocked his man over, jumped in to punch, his face connected on the knee, and he got knocked out. And then the other guy stood up and did a forward flip on his back, which was just the worst. That was the reason it made it into the news, but the entire thing was very strange. So yeah, I think bring back knees to the head on the ground, work out how we're going to deal with up kicks, fix the gloves, fix the cage, and if you're a top 10 fighter, or if there are two top 10 fighters in a fight, it has to go 25 minutes, can't go 15. I think those are the rules that I would change if I could. It would make for longer nights, though, so you really have to be a fan to enjoy that stuff. Cheers, Dylan. Hey, Jack. I saw this video, and he's linked it, where it looks like Sainchai is starting a round kick and then switching to a push kick. Does this kick have a name? Do you have any fights where this is used well? Thanks, from Greg. Yeah, this is just... I think in my fighting karate I called it either Mikazuki Geri or Hangetsu Geri or something like that. But it's basically like... A lot of styles call it a crescent kick, but it's where you bring your knee out to the side as if you're going to throw a round kick, and then you drop the foot in line. You drop the foot so that it's going... So that your shin is going from 12 to 6, and you front kick them. Really slick technique. As a push kick, you're not going to get a lot of stank on it, but you can whip it in like a front kick and get some good power on it. Works very well against people who are going to check the kick. If you watch my boy watch, Lorenz Larkin, which is on the YouTube channel, we talk about his stomp kick, but we also talk about Bas Rutten doing the same thing. He throws a couple of low kicks. Maurice Smith goes to check the kick, and he comes up the center with the straight kick. And it really only works with guys who are going to check the kick. It doesn't work as well with guys who aren't going to check the kick, so you just keep kicking them in the leg. It's one of those techniques that works best on guys who are of a higher technical level. Cheers, Greg. Dear Mr. Slack, I know this is vague, but how has your thinking changed since you first began writing/analysing? From Andrew. That's interesting. I think I've become a lot more jaded. No, the sport has come along such a long way in that time. I go back and watch the guys that Anderson Silva was knocking out, and some of the guys that we were calling like top strikers back in the day. And I was watching them at the time and thinking, I am playing this up a bit. But now I actually don't have to play up what guys are capable of. There is good boxing in the UFC. There's good kickboxing in the UFC. It's not on the level of professional kickboxing and professional boxing, but there's a lot more going on. This has become its own sport, and the striking is high level. Watching Chris Leben and Forrest Griffin charge face first onto Anderson Silva, and acting like that was an act of genius on Anderson Silva's part was hard work. But I think the standard has got so much higher that I'm genuinely enjoying the sport more, even when the cards aren't as good. Or rather, enjoying writing about the sport, because there's more to look at. There's more interesting stuff going on. And there's also a lot more styles. Back in the... When did I start? It was probably 2012, 2013. Things were still very plodding. Everyone was Muay Thai. Muay Thai with overhands, that was everyone. And now you've got guys like Justin Scoggins and Stephen Thompson and Darren Cruikshank coming in with weird side-on point karate styles and all sorts of other stuff going on. It's really interesting. It's better. We've got this freedom in this sport. There's lots of styles. The thing about boxing and things like that is that there is this perception that there's one perfect way to do it and everyone should strive to do it that way. MMA, you have to accept, no, there isn't a perfect way to do it. And even if I stand in my perfect Muay Thai stance and I use my Muay Thai, I can't sidekick as readily as that guy who's in a side-on stance, but there are trade-offs for both of our stances. It's not one is better than the other. I think of the sport more from a business perspective and matchup stuff. I didn't used to write about that stuff at all, but I find it seeping into my writing more and more, thinking about where things go in the future, thinking about how this sport could continue growing when they basically botched the McGregor momentum and everything else. And I think, you go through personal phases. What I'm doing at any one time will affect my perception of fights. At the moment, I'm working really hard on my inversions in jiu-jitsu, so I'm watching tons of meows and stuff like that, and I'm just going crazy if I see a guy invert for a leg entanglement or something like that in MMA. I've been working on front snap kicks for years, but I really got into them more heavily in like 2013, 2014, when I had some training with a lass called Yuko Takahashi. It was some one-on-one training, and she was teaching me how to coil my kick from the floor, heel to arse, rather than picking the knee up first, and it really changed my kicking game. And from then on, I was like, wow, this kick is a lot more practical than I previously thought it was. If I was front kicking someone in sparring, it was a push kick, or like a push kick with a little bit of snap on, and I felt like all that makes the difference between my snap kick and my push kick is how tired I am, how explosively I can move it from that chamber. But chambering it very low and swinging it up really changed the dynamic of the kick for me. And those are the sort of kicks that you're seeing really have an effect in MMA now. Snap kicks, they can come from the floor, they can be coiled heel to arse, but it tends to be that swinging up from the floor that offers the power to it, rather than chamber, snap, back to the chamber, and then down, which is like the classical way of teaching it in martial arts. I really started preaching much more heavily for the front kick then. Front snap kick, that is. And, just things like that. What you're working on at the time changes your perception of fights. Or there's a name for it. It's called the something effect. It's where you hear about something or start focusing on something for the first time, and then you start seeing it everywhere. That happens to me just as much as anyone else. I don't have a list of criteria I go through when I watch a fight, so really it's just what sticks out to me. And that's affected by what I'm doing at that particular time in my own training. Cheers, Andrew. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. We'll be back on either Monday or maybe Sunday night if I'm feeling ultra cheeky, if I can get away from the missus. I might be able to get the star ratings up on Sunday night, but otherwise Monday morning. Really looking forward to this event. If you are not a Patreon boy and you wish to support the podcast and my new reporting career, you can do so at Patreon. There are history lectures for Patreon boys roughly each month. New one coming out soon, Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock. Cannot wait. Enjoying that so much. Going through all the old footage and the Tito Ortiz is a punk and I'm going to beat you into a living death and all that. If you haven't bought Notorious, do. If you haven't bookmarked the Fight Primer, do. And if you want to get in touch with the show and send us a question or hate mail, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, the #1 reporter in MMA, and I'll catch you all on Monday. Zab bless.